What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones. And coming up on today's episode, Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala joins the show. We'll take a look back at the season as we give our evaluation of the year and look ahead to the offseason. All that and more coming up. Joining me here in the Broncos podcast studio for today's episode of Broncos Now is Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala. Eric, thanks for joining me today.
You got it, Sid.
First official week of the offseason in the books. Did you have time to debrief, relax a bit from the season?
Yeah, I did. It's going to be a busy offseason, but nice to take a few days and relax and kind of reflect on the season and then look ahead to what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it will be a busy offseason, but not a lot going on right now in the Broncos world, Eric.
That's right, yeah. Sean Payton, he talked about taking a little bit of time off before starting the evaluation process of this roster, just to make sure you get some good separation. And, you know, he shared the story of back in New Orleans when you would review a playoff team, you'd probably always give them a little bit higher of a grade than they deserved. And when you reviewed a losing team, a team that didn't make the playoffs, maybe you would get a little bit harsher of a grade. So putting some time between those things is helpful from the grading process, but they'll be back at it soon with that process. Senior Bowl's on the horizon. Combine is closer than you would think. And then before you know it, we'll be talking about free agency and the draft.
Yep. Eric, like you mentioned, coaching staff has taken some time to have a mental reset, but I figured since we'll be back doing those evaluations next week, I figured we could go in doing a little evaluation of the roster. So I want to start first, looking back at the season. Who do you think was the best offensive and defensive player of the year?
Yeah, I mean, offensively, I think it's got to be Courtland Sutton. The 10 touchdowns were impressive, a lot of spectacular plays.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't have the kind of the yardage numbers that normally go with a touchdown total like that. Right. But I do think just in terms of his ability to show up in big moments, he was that guy. And, you know, we talked a lot before the season about how Sean Payton in his offenses, normally there's one guy that kind of emerges as the go-to target, and Courtland became that guy. Russell Wilson obviously had a lot of confidence in him and had a good rapport with Courtland Sutton. And just personally to see Courtland bounce back from a tough couple of years and not performing at the level he knew he was capable of, it was really cool to see him have the season he did. Defensively, you know, I know Pat won team MVP and he was tremendous, you know, as voted on by the Pro Football Writers here. Right. I do want to maybe just to be a little different. I'm going to go with Jaquan McMillan.
Wow.
Just because I thought from the time he was inserted into the lineup, he was a little bit of a revelation there at nickel, made a lot of plays, had a knack for forcing the ball out. And I think you could make the argument that he was just the defensive MVP in terms of how many plays he made. And Pat obviously shut a lot of guys down and I think should have been an all-pro. It was disappointing to not see him get that recognition. But I think just the way that J-Mac made those plays was really impressive to me. And I don't know that nationally he got enough credit for what he did. I think locally people understood that, but
for sure.
But he had a heck of a season and certainly was, if not the most valuable guy in that defense, certainly right up there.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. When you said you weren't going to pick Pat, Eric, for a second there, I thought you were going to say Alex Singleton because he had a heck of a year too.
Yeah, he did. Ton of tackles, double-digit tackles almost every single game. He was everywhere. Yeah, he had a heck of a year too. He'd be a good choice as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, Eric, moving past that, looking at the rookies, who do you think had the best rookie season?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I do think it was Marvin, and not just because he was the first pick and made the Pro Bowl and all that, but again, I think the game-changing type plays were just really impressive. And I know a lot of those came in the special teams game, but that's an area that the Broncos just haven't been very good, frankly, in a long time. I think, you know, Rick Gosselin puts out his special teams rankings. The Broncos were 7th this year. They led the league in kickoff returns. They were obviously really good in the punt return game, too. Been since 2015 that they ranked in the top 10 of that unit, and the credit goes to a lot of people there. In Mike Westhoff, Ben Kotwika, Chris Banjo, all the players, obviously. For sure. Our friend Ike, he makes some good videos for the special teams unit.
Videos.
But, you know, I just think the way that Marvin was able to provide a jolt and be kind of that must-watch guy of every time he caught the ball, was he going to score? Was he going to get a big return that gave the Broncos a chance? It just was electric. And then obviously made some big plays in the passing game too. Has a catch that sets up a win against Chicago.
Yeah.
Has a big catch against New England that gave the Broncos a chance. Obviously had a touchdown.
Washington game too.
Exactly, touchdown in the big catch against Washington. So I'm looking forward to see what he does moving forward. Jalil, obviously, McLaughlin is kind of the other pick there, just in terms of the way he was able to come in and make the roster as an undrafted rookie, earn such a big role. I think more than 60 all-purpose yards in 4 games, had a couple touchdowns early, and just impressed the coaching staff enough that he continued to earn more reps moving forward and a bigger role. So he'll be another guy that as you enter 2024, what's the vision look like for him? Because I think he's got a promising future too.
I think so too. Eric, kind of going off of that, I know Jalil talked in the final couple weeks of the season just about him going to head coach Sean Payton and asking him for a bigger role and kind of getting more involved in the passing game. Do you see that being kind of his role moving forward into the next couple of seasons?
Yeah, it's whenever Sean Payton brings up that joker role, you kind of know he thinks highly of a player. He talked about Greg Dulcich potentially fulfilling that before the season. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition, unfortunately. But yeah, I think the fact that he used that term with Jalil as a possibility, that extends to the passing game, the running game, just a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He has the speed that complements the Broncos' other backs really well. And it just doesn't take the big hits, as Sean Payton pointed out. He's tough for a guy his size. So with a year in an NFL offseason, NFL strength program, it'll be interesting to see kind of how he develops. But yeah, he's kind of like the Broncos, almost like a secret weapon at times, and I'd imagine they'd look to get him involved more moving forward. But I think the exciting part of every season is just you hope to see those guys take the next step, but who else is coming in to try to get that role for themselves? So there's always a little bit of unknown, but certainly Jalil, great story, great guy. You love, easy to root for. 100%. And so hopefully that success continues for him.
I hope to see that too. All right, well, Eric, next grouping, top offensive play and top defensive play of the year.
Oh, man.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah.
It's hard to think back, I know.
No, I it's maybe a little bit of a cop-out, but that play in Buffalo that Cortland Sutton made is
That's
just
the first one I think of, yeah.
It's either that or I know the Cortland catch against LA got a lot of traction. I think the one against Minnesota. On that drive, the one-hander and then the one in the end zone, both of those were impressive. But just the Buffalo play, for what it meant just in terms of it being fourth down, Russ getting away, Cortland somehow finding a way to get his
big
feet
toe in there.
Yeah, exactly. Somehow finding a way to make that catch in Buffalo, a good football team as we're seeing. Those were just, it was just a great play. And I think kind of when you think back on Cortland's season, that stands out as the defining moment. And I just think because in my mind, he was the offensive player of the year. To me, that has to be the top offensive play.
No, I agree.
Defensively, a lot of great plays. I mean, certainly all the turnovers, takeaways against the Chiefs stand out. There were some great defensive plays against the Chargers. Obviously came up with some stops against Minnesota. But again, I think the one that stands out to me is the Coupon score, as we've called it, against Chicago. It just kind of changed the season.
It did.
And I know ultimately it didn't go the Broncos' way and they didn't make the playoffs, but that felt like a moment where, Nick Bonito strip sacks Justin Fields on kind of that naked boot, and Jonathan Cooper's able to pick it up and run for the touchdown. That was a big moment. It spurred the comeback, and the defense kind of switched it into gear there where took another couple weeks maybe to be perfect, but from that point forward, the defense was a lot better, started figuring things out, and it was just such a fun play.
It was.
I believe right? The lone defensive touchdown of the year.
Yeah.
So to me, that stands out as a memorable moment from the year.
I agree. Those were the two ones I had written down too as well, Eric.
I passed.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the kind of evaluation question of the year for you. What do you think the top position group was this year for the Broncos?
Oh, man. That's a tough one. I'll say this. The offensive line has taken a lot of flack here over recent years. It was a big priority coming into this season. Added Mike McGlinchey, added Ben Powers. You got Garrett Bowles back from injury. Brought in new offensive line coaches and Zach Strief and Austin King. The way they were able to perform, and granted, it wasn't always perfect, and there were some tough games, but I think back to how they handled Myles Garrett in a big win over Cleveland at home.
Right.
I think to how good they were in the run game at times. A lot of these kind of evaluation metrics and analytics put them in the top 10 for the year. And I just thought as a group, they had an identity. They took a step forward. Again, it wasn't always perfect, but I thought that they set the tone, especially when the Broncos were running the football well and having success in that area. I was impressed with the offensive line, obviously, until, before Mike McGlinchey missed that last game.
Right.
They got to play every single game together, same starting lineup for the first 16 games. That was a huge deal.
Huge. Yeah.
For a long time, the offensive line was kind of a concern, and this year it wasn't necessarily, and it was a strength of this football team. We know Sean Payton likes to build up front. That was a clear priority in the offseason, and it, for the most part, came to fruition.
Yeah. I love that choice. I wasn't sure what you were gonna go with there, but that was a good one. Eric, you mentioned the Browns and then the Bills a bit earlier. I know the Browns were just eliminated from the playoffs, but just like to point out there's still 3 teams remaining in the playoffs that the Broncos beat this season.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat from our friend Mike Kliss said that no team has beaten more than 3 of the remaining playoff teams, and the Broncos are among that grouping, right? They beat the Packers, beat the Chiefs, beat the Bills. So it shows you that the Broncos can beat these teams. I think there's some of that of any given Sunday, anybody can beat anybody. But when you beat 3 of them, I think it says something.
It says something. I agree.
Now, the next step is just the consistency of you got to beat the teams that are your kind of talent level. You got to beat the teams that are not competitive and can't drop some of those games. Obviously, the Broncos lost games to the Commanders, to the Jets, to the Patriots. I mean, you got to eliminate some of that and play at a consistent level. But you're right. I think you look at this playoff field and you say, okay, the Broncos on their best day can beat these teams that are standing here at the end. And, do they have as much, like, are they going to win 15 games? I don't know. I mean, that's the goal, right? To be able to do that. But I think they're a well-coached team that has the talent and certainly has the ability to beat these teams if they play well. And the fact that they were able to beat 3 of these teams says something. Yeah,
I agree. Well, like you said, it's going to be a busy offseason to get to that point. Eric, appreciate you joining the show today.
You got it, Sid.
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Broncos Now. Broncos Country, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube next week for another episode. I will see you all then.